Hello, everybody. Good evening. Wednesday night.
Hello, good evening, Bruce. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm just
All right, we're getting there. Hello, everybody. Wendy, Lenina, Poosh. Chandrakant, that's a hard one for me. Deborah, hello, hello, hello.
You got that right, Bruce. Thank you.
You're welcome. And here's Sue tonight. Hello, Sue. We still got people popping in here. Okay, so we'll get started and we'll enter the people that are late as they come in. Just want to remind everybody that when you want to sign out, you're going to let us know. We sign you out on the computer. That doesn't mean you have to stop coming to class. What it means is that you have a year from the day we sign you out to pass your test, get fingerprinted, and hang your license with a broker. And up until last year, they never gave extensions on that, but they're giving extensions now because of COVID. I don't know how long they're going to last, so I would count on it just being a year. Now, I always recommend that when you're ready to stop coming to class, that you take your test right away, because this stuff, you'll lose the information out of your brain really quickly on this stuff. It doesn't embed for a long period of time. Unless you're using it every day. So you want to take that test as quickly as possible. All right, so we take the 75-hour class. We sign you out.
Bruce, I'm sorry, I want to interrupt again. Are we going to do the test today or no?
Tomorrow.
Oh, it's going to be, okay, sorry, I forgot. Thank you.
We're going to have a bonus class tomorrow to go over the test. I'll send the test out tomorrow morning for people who don't have it. And then we're going to go over it tomorrow night as a bonus class. Nobody has to be at the class, but it's, a couple people have asked for it, so we'll be happy to, help them get what they need. All right, so you can take the 75-hour class. You can sign out when you want. If you sign out, you can still come to classes. That's not a big deal. But after I sign you out, probably the next day after I sign you out, because it takes a day for the information to get swept up, you'll sign up for the test at PSI. And the PSI is on the Real Estate Commission's website. To take the test at PSI is $45. To get fingerprinted is $66.05. And you sign up for your broker, it's $160. And that's for your license fee and your criminal background check at the same time. So take your test at PSI. You can schedule it online. You can take it in person, or you can take it via computer. And I understand that the people who take it by computer do just as well as the people who take it in person. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. My allergies are starting today. And the microphone should have a cough button. I used to do a radio show. And the radio show, the microphone had a cough button. So if you knew you were going to sneeze, you'd push the button and it would silence the mic for a minute. So anyway.
Space bar mutes you.
Does it?
Yeah.
Am I muted now? I tried it. Nobody heard what I said, so I guess it worked. Who was that? Eric? Thank you.
No, we heard you.
Oh, let me try.
You have to press the space button and release your finger.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you.
All right, so I haven't quite figured it out yet. We'll work on it later. But knowing that, I can kind of figure it out. This is what the signing up for PSI looks like. Yeah, you don't pay for PSI for your background check. you pay that when you send your paperwork into the real estate commission. So here you can see the fee for the real estate salesperson combo. That's the test you're going to be taking, is the real estate salesperson combo. It has 240 minutes that you can take it. That's 4 hours. It's $45. Up here is a candidate's handbook, and there's some questions in there. You can download that candidate's handbook and take a look at all their instructions, and there's some questions on it. You can pay PSI to take a test at PSI, and their test that they give at PSI is pretty relevant to the class since it's their test. So pretty easy. You can get an appointment just about any time you want now. If you want a specific location at a specific time, it might take you a couple of days to get that specific location and the specific time. Here's the different testing locations. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different locations. The closest one to here is North Brunswick. I think there's one down in Toms River and one in Fairlawn or Fairview. But this is all within that PSI site on the Real Estate Commission's website. So you can pick it up on there. When you go to get fingerprinted, this is the form you're going to get fingerprinted with. You'll do it at Indent to Go. That's a New Jersey universal fingerprinting form. If you've been fingerprinted before, you still have to get fingerprinted again. That's to make sure that you haven't done anything bad since the last time you got fingerprinted. And they do your fingerprints electronically. So that comes after you've passed your test. And that brings us to the chapter on liens, foreclosure, and redemption. So that's where we're going to start tonight, liens, foreclosure, and redemption. So foreclosures are right now not happening except for vacant houses that have certain types of loans. There's very few foreclosures actually going to the sheriff's sale now. But when there are a lot of foreclosures, every county has a foreclosure sale every week because there's foreclosures happening in every county every week. And foreclosures are the result of somebody not making their mortgage payments or some other default on their mortgage. And in New Jersey, our foreclosures are a judicial process. So our foreclosures are done through the court system. We have a judicial process for foreclosures in New Jersey. And we have what's called a strict foreclosure rule. We foreclose under the Fair Foreclosure Act. Very complicated. In New Jersey, it takes the second longest period of time to foreclose of any other of the 50 states. So some states like Florida, you can foreclose in 30 days or 60 days, but in New Jersey, foreclosure sometimes take 5 years to foreclose. So a foreclosure is the result of the lien that's created because of your mortgage. And a mortgage is an encumbrance. So when we talk about encumbrances, we're talking about anything that complicates your ownership. And encumbrances can be leases, encumbrance can be deed restrictions, encumbrance could be liens, an encumbrance could be an encroachment, all different things that complicate your ownership. They're called encumbrances. And these are your bundle of rights that's in your fee simple bundle of rights. Those are the rights that go along with your real property ownership. And again, encumbrances are things that complicate or limit those rights one way or another. So encumbrances can be easements, like an easement in gross or an easement appertenant. And an easement appertenant, remember, has two adjacent properties with a dominant and a servient estate. Let's see, we got a question here. Yeah, Lauren, I'll talk to her later on. An easement, an encumbrance, a type of encumbrance can be a restriction, like a deed restriction, and you can also have public restrictions like zoning, planning, building, health and safety, and you could have private restrictions like, neighborhood schemes where you have a condo association where there's no signs allowed. An encumbrance can also be an encroachment. Your neighbor's physical property is on your real property. His real property is on your real property. His fence is on your real property. And I have a house that's in Manalapan. That Manalapan is a crazy town that requires a zoning certificate of occupancy. Only town I've ever run across that does this. So if you're buying a house in Manalapan, you have to get a survey done, and then the zoning officer comes out to make sure that all the zoning is correct. And the property that we have under contract, when he came out to check that out, it was noted that the driveway for the house that I have listed was encroaching on the neighbor's property. So they had paved their driveway too wide, and it was on the neighbor's property. So we're going to have to dig up some of that driveway. But that's an example of an encroachment. And an encroachment is a type of encumbrance. These are all different types of encumbrances. And you can see there's plenty of them. It's anything that complicates your form of ownership, anything that complicates your form of ownership on your deed. So my least favorite part of the class is reading you guys stuff off of slides, so I don't usually do it. You can take a look at this for a second, but again, this is just a formal legal description of what a encumbrance is, and all kinds of different things can be encumbrances. We want to look at encumbrances for the most part being liens and being encroachments and being easements. Those are the biggest ones that we're concerned with. In New Jersey, we have lis pendens. Lis pendens is Latin for litigation pending. And when we see a lis pendens, typically it signifies to us that that particular property owner is on his way to a foreclosure. Yes, this is the Liens, Foreclosure, and Redemption chapter. I think it's chapter 15. Don't have a book in front of me. So if we're talking about foreclosure, when does the foreclosure process begin? Well, it begins when you default on any of your mortgage covenants. One of the mortgage covenants is to pay your loan. Another one is to pay your taxes if you're paying your taxes directly. Another one is to keep the property insured. Another one is to keep the property in good repair. So when does the foreclosure process? It's when the bank accelerates your loan. We talked about that last night in the test. Accelerates your loan is instead of being due in 30 years, they're going to tell you it's due right away. And if you don't pay it off right away, they begin the foreclosure process. One of the first things they have to do is they have to notify all the other lien holders that are involved so that they have a chance to join the foreclosure lawsuit. At some point, they're going to file a lis pendens because New Jersey is a judicial foreclosure state, and we do have to get in front of a judge in order to foreclose. That lis pendens is our ticket to get in front of a judge at some point. And then there's all kinds of waiting dates, and there's all kinds of opportunities for the homeowner to correct his delinquency. But it's a long process, and it takes time. Now, when you get your licenses, the fact that it's a long process and it takes time gives you ample opportunity to look at people who are in the process of losing their homes and see if you can convince them to sell their homes. And have them sell their homes so they don't get foreclosed, because selling your home is an alternative to being foreclosed. Of course, you might have to do a short sale because the homeowner might owe more on the house than the house is worth. But that's just normal way of doing business. So again, you're going to have notices of intent to foreclose. At some point, they're going to put something on your front door that's a notice. As soon as the lis pendens is filed, it's public record and everybody can look it up. When you go on Zillow, when you see pre-foreclosure listings, those are properties that have had a lis pendens filed against them. And even though Zillow posts them on their site, they're not available. Those aren't for sale. Those are just people who have had a lis pendens filed against them, and they are on their path to foreclosure. Now, they may choose to sell, and you may go after them to try to get them to list with you. But again, the only person who can make that decision is the homeowner, because before you get to foreclosure, only the homeowner can make decisions about what's going on with their house. So
Bruce, lease pendant is the first step towards the foreclosure?
Not the first step. There's several steps before that, but those steps are like all private. Nobody knows about them but you and the bank. List pendants is the first step that's public record. So a list pendant is when it first shows up that there may be, you may be moving towards a foreclosure. That's why Zillow knows about them, and that's why Zillow has them as pre-foreclosure, because the fact that you have a list pendants filed against you means that somebody is doing a foreclosure suit against you. But it is not the first step. The first step is to accelerate your loan. During the first 3 months that you're behind, they will try to make some kind of accommodation with you, or maybe do some kind of a forbearance or some kind of a modification. But after you're 3 months late, then they're forced to go ahead and start the foreclosure. The banks or the servicers do that as part of their agreement with the lenders. All right, so you're going to get served with the foreclosure complaint. And once you get served with that foreclosure complaint, it's called a summons. From then on, they won't put that on your door anymore. Instead, they'll put it in your local newspaper. So again, you'll no longer receive notices directly. Instead, the lender will publish all notices in your local newspaper. You will get information about New Jersey's foreclosure mediation program, and New Jersey does give you an opportunity to work with a mediator to try to find some solution for you not losing your house. All right, so now you've gone through the 4 years of not paying your mortgage. You've gone through the whole process, and you're getting real close to the foreclosure, and they advertise in the newspaper, and they're going to advertise in the newspaper for it's 2 4-week periods now. It used to be 2 2-week periods, but now it's 2 4-week periods because of a change in the law. And then at some point, you're actually going to be at the sale. Your house is going to be at the sheriff's sale. And in Middlesex County, the sheriff's sale is on Wednesdays. In Monmouth County, the sheriff's sale is on Mondays. And you're free to go and sit in if you want to see how it works. You're free to see how it operates when they're working again. Right now, because of COVID, they're only doing very, very special foreclosures for properties that are vacant. But once we remove all these lockdowns, you'll be able to go and see how it works yourself. And at the sale, investors bid, and also the bank bids. So the bank will bid sometimes to protect its position, because if the loan was originated with PMI, private mortgage insurance, or it's a Fannie Mae loan and there's MIP, mortgage insurance premiums, MIP, or it's a VA loan with a VA guarantee, the bank may want to get the property back even if they have to bid more than the property is worth. Because if the bank gets the property back, then they get to reap the benefit of those guarantees or insurances. But other than that, the top bidder gets the property. You have to have 20% of your winning bid with you at the sale. You're going to turn it over to the sheriff at the sale, and it's going to be turned over in collected funds, cash or bank checks, to the sheriff. In Middlesex County, you have 14 days after the sale to come back with the other 80% and give it to the sheriff, and then you'll get a sheriff's deed. So it's 14 days after the sale. In Monmouth County, it's 30 days after the sale. But in both instances, and all other counties in New Jersey, there is a 10-day period of redemption. So at the sheriff's sale, if somebody, a homeowner, has their house at the sale, and an investor buys the house at the sale, the homeowner has 10 days to come up with all the money they owe the bank, and they can turn the sheriff's sale around. They can cancel out the sheriff's sale. If the property sells at the sheriff's sale for more than the bank is owed, then that creates an equity of redemption. And the homeowner can then apply for that equity of redemption through the sheriff's department after the sale. If the property sells for less than is owed to the bank, then the bank has the ability to get a deficiency judgment against the homeowner. When you're working in the street and you've got a short sale where you're going to be getting the bank to accept less than what they are owed on the property, you always want to make sure you ask the bank to waive the deficiency judgment against the homeowner. So you want to waive the deficiency judgment against the homeowner. They don't have to, but if you don't ask, they'll never do it. All right, so again, if your home is sold, the equity of redemption, if it sells for more than you owe, you get that back. If you're the purchaser at the sheriff's sale, it transfers to you with the sheriff's deed. If your house sells for less than you owe the bank, there may be a deficiency judgment that's issued. Now, we do have some alternatives to foreclosure. One is a deed in lieu of foreclosure. A deed in lieu of foreclosure is you are a homeowner and you're behind in your mortgage and you don't want to be foreclosed because it's embarrassing, because they're going to publish your name in the newspaper. They're going to publish your name in the list pendants list. So you may not want that embarrassment. So you may say to the bank, how can we stop this? And one of the ways is a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So with a deed in lieu of foreclosure, the mortgagor, that's the borrower, the mortgagor prepares a deed and deeds the property back to the mortgagee, the lender. So in other words, the homeowner who's losing his house because he's not paying his mortgage is just going to deed the house back to the lender. And deeds in lieu of foreclosure are a really good idea because they're better on your credit, and they also put you back in control of what's happening in terms of a time period. So they're not a bad idea, although some of the loans, depending on what kind of insurance they have and what kind of loan they are, or if what position they're in, or if there is a junior loan behind them, some loans are not able to do deeds in lieu of foreclosure. So a lot of the times you'll see somebody trying to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure where the mortgagor is giving the house back to the mortgagee and the bank, the mortgagee won't take it. Another alternative to a foreclosure, and this is the one where we make money in. This is something to keep your eyes open with, and that's a short sale. And a short sale is an example of somebody who owes $300,000 on their house, and their house is only worth $200,000. So now they're going to try to sell their house, and they're going to try to get the $200,000, and they're going to ask the bank to forgive the other $100,000. And so they're going to be short of the amount of money that will pay off the lien. So they're asking the bank to be short on the amount of money to pay off the lien. And in order to do a short sale, the homeowner has to agree to it, and the bank has to agree to it. And often the bank has sold the mortgage and the note to Fannie and Freddie, who have packaged them and sold them to investors. So you may have to have investors have to agree to it, the investors who bought the mortgage-backed securities. So a short sale sometimes could take a year or 2 years to get through. Now we're seeing less and less of them every day because housing prices have gone up so much that there's not as many short sales. People who are behind in their mortgages now are able to sell their house and still have some equity. Another thing we have to be aware of is the Service Members Civil Relief Act. This makes it more difficult to foreclose on somebody's house if they're on active military duty. And that only makes sense because if you're on active military duty, if you're on active military duty, you know, you may be overseas and not able to receive all the notices. So they do give some leeway to people who are in active military duty through the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The next thing is real property taxes and assessments. Everybody has to pay real estate taxes. Fox News tonight, just before I started class, was talking about a special they're going to run called The History of Taxes in the United States, a 5-part documentary. I don't know exactly when it's going to start, but that's going to be interesting to watch because our tax system has gotten crazy. Anyway, you know, there's always headlines about cities going broke. And the way municipalities in New Jersey, this is New Jersey specific, the way municipalities in Jersey pay for their municipal budgets is all through income taxes, all through real estate taxes, or all through real estate taxes. So you've got to pay real estate taxes. And real estate taxes that are unpaid automatically jump to first position even if they're not recording. Remember, the position, you know, the priority of liens is determined by time and date of recording. Whatever was recorded first has first priority, except unpaid municipal real estate taxes automatically jump to first position, even without being recorded. So again, we have an obligation to pay our real estate taxes, and we can lose our house by not paying the taxes. We can lose our house if we don't pay the taxes. If a tax lien certificate is created and the tax lien certificate holder holds it for 2 years and you don't pay them back in 2 years, they can foreclose for the unpaid municipal taxes. So again, very important that we pay our real estate taxes.
Bruce, I have
Yes.
a question.
Go ahead.
It says that when the equitable right of redemption, they terminate it once the sheriff's deed is delivered to a successful bidder. What that means, meaning you didn't pay the bank the remaining balance, and before that, if your deed is already delivered to the bidder, that means you lose your house.
So if the bank, so you hit on a really important piece of information that sort of governs our technique for getting that deficiency judgment waived. Because in New Jersey, if you go ahead and press on your deficiency judgment, then it does reverse the sheriff's sale. And that means that whoever purchased it at the sheriff's sale would lose the house if it would open the foreclosure again. So that's why and many times if you ask for the deficiency judgment to waived, they're happy to do it because they're not going to press the deficiency judgment anyway because it reopens the foreclosure again. So that's a technique. Now, in some states, like California, if you do a deficiency judgment for almost a year after the property is sold, it can reopen the foreclosure. So again, that's just like a little special bit of information that gives you more power when you're negotiating with the lender in a short sale. Okay. All right, so now we're talking about tax sales again. Every municipality may, at any time when your taxes are overdue, at any time. Now, typically they do it once a year, although some towns do it twice a year. But at any time your taxes are overdue, your municipality can have a tax lien sale. And what they do is they offer your taxes, somebody who hasn't paid their taxes. They say, okay, who would like to pay the taxes? And the first gentleman on here is Mr. Singh. So who would like to pay the taxes for Mr. Singh? And then an investor will pay the taxes for Mr. Singh. An investor will pay $3,086.11, and he'll pay it. I think this is TNEC. He'll pay those taxes to TNEC, and then a tax lien certificate will be issued to the investor who did that. And if he holds that tax lien certificate for 2 years, he can foreclose. Typically, the bidding on these things, it starts at 18%. Typically, the bidding goes down to 0% plus a premium. So that means somebody is going to pay his taxes, and for the first year, they're going to get 0% interest. But then, as soon as next year's taxes are due, they have the ability to pay next year's taxes. And when they pay next year's taxes, they're going to get an 18% interest rate on next year's taxes, plus a 2% penalty if it's over $5,000, plus a 2% redemption penalty. So on the first $3,000, he's going to get 0%, but on the second year, he's going to get 22%. That makes it a really good investment. And if the homeowner does not pay him back within 2 years, he can foreclose just for the unpaid taxes. And remember, the unpaid taxes automatically jump to first position. So if that person happens to have a mortgage, it's going to wipe out the mortgage because the mortgage is in second position. And usually that doesn't happen. Usually we don't get to the point of foreclosure on these because if there is a mortgage, of course the lender is going to pay the back taxes because the lender doesn't want to lose the property for just the unpaid taxes. So the lender will pay the back taxes. But then when they pay your back taxes for you, that's where it violates your covenant to pay taxes, and they'll accelerate your loan and start the foreclosure process. So again, the bank is protecting its own interest in all this. Now, these lists go on and on and on, and they're going to be getting longer this year. Because of COVID, we're going to have a lot more people not paying their taxes, and these tax lien sales will get to be again a very big opportunity for people to get interest rates on, relatively higher interest rates. If nobody bids on the tax liens, at the sale, then the town buys the tax liens back, and the town then holds the tax lien certificates. And when the town holds the tax lien certificates, that's called in rem, I-N, second word is rem, R-E-M. That's in rem. And when the town holds the certificates in rem, then their period of holding before they can foreclose is only 6 months. So if a town has tax lien certificates in rem, then they only have to hold them for 6 months, not for 2 years. And you can go to towns and you can say, hey, do you have any tax lien certificates in rem? I'd like to buy them. And typically they'll sell them to you for a discount because they don't want them on their books either. So they'll sell them to you for a discount. We do have somebody having a hard time getting in here. I don't know if I can figure out why they're not getting in. All right, so some towns have this once a year. They typically have them very near the end of their tax year. So if their tax year ends in December, they'll have them the end of December. If their tax year ends in, the fiscal year ends June 30th, then they'll have them in June. And again, the reason is you want to be real close to when the next year's taxes are due so that the investor can pay next year's taxes and get that higher interest rate as early as possible. All right, again, the interest starts at 8%. Usually it gets bid down to 0% with a premium. If it's not paid in 2 years, the lien holder can foreclose. If no one bids, then the town buys it, and that's called in rem. And the holding period is only 6 months if it's in rem. We're going to talk about other kinds of liens now. Liens can be, and remember, a lien is a type of encumbrance. A lien is a type of encumbrance, and a lien is always a financial claim. So a lien is a type of encumbrance, and it's a financial claim. We can have specific liens or general liens. A specific lien is a lien that's against a specific property, real property. A general lien is one that's against all the real property, all your real property. So we can have specific and we can have general. We can also have voluntary and involuntary. And a voluntary lien, you give your permission for the lien to be placed on your property. For an involuntary lien, it's done without your permission. So when we talk about a mechanics lien, you have a contractor who does work at your house and you don't pay them, they have the right to file a mechanics lien. And when they file that mechanics lien, it has to be done within 90 days of the work being completed or the last materials being delivered. And if you file it before that 90-day period is up, if you're a contractor and somebody doesn't pay you and you file it, it serves as a specific lien. It's only against the property that you did the work on, and it's an involuntary lien. The contractor doesn't need your permission to put on the lien. Keep in mind that the time and date of recording establishes priority. So if you're a contractor and you do work on somebody's house and they don't pay you and you file a mechanics lien, you're going to be in the lowest position, not the highest position. You won't be in first, you'll be in second or third or fourth, depending what other liens are there. So the probability that a mechanics lien will create a foreclosure somewhere down the line is minimal. But what the mechanics lien can do is it can just sit on your deed as the lien and collect interest. So again, a mechanics lien is a specific lien and it's an involuntary lien. We also have things that are called attachments. Attachments are not quite a lien yet. Somebody is going to bring you to court, and sometimes it takes a couple years to get into court. Somebody's going to bring you to court and they think they have a good case and they want to stop you from selling your house and disappearing. So they might put an attachment on your property. An attachment acts the same as a lien, but it's not a lien yet. It acts as a lien. And again, the attachment is going to have priority based on time and date of recording once it gets moved to the status of being a lien. Okay, so a lien attachment acts as a lien, but it's not quite a lien yet. Other kinds of liens are your mortgage lien. Your mortgage lien is a specific lien because it's only against your house, and your mortgage lien is a voluntary lien because you are giving permission for that lien. We can also have federal and state tax liens. Federal and state tax liens are involuntary liens, and federal and state tax liens for things like income tax, federal and state tax liens for things like income tax are general liens. That means they're liens against all your property, not just one property. So a mortgage lien is a specific lien and a voluntary lien. A mechanics lien is a specific lien, but an involuntary lien. A tax lien is a involuntary specific lien for income taxes or for estate taxes. And for real estate taxes, it's a specific involuntary lien for real estate taxes. So liens can be general or specific, voluntary or involuntary. Another thing to be concerned with is when you die, there is a lien that is automatically placed upon the dead person's real and personal property. It's an automatic part of probate, and that lien that's placed on the dead person's property is there until they pay off all the debts and any taxes that might be owed, any estate taxes that might be owed. President Biden is talking about increasing the rate of estate taxes. You should read up on what the higher rate of estate taxes are. If you're gonna leave an estate of, I think it's $10 million, which is, a lot of money. I think he's speculating that the inheritance tax is going to be 50%. So that's painful. But anyway, we'll see what happens. They've got to pay for all this COVID stuff somehow. All right. Again, sometimes when somebody dies and there is an automatic lien created against their property, what you do is, sometimes as a real estate agent, is you advise them that they need to have that lien lifted. And if the estate is under a certain amount of dollars, then you just fill out an affidavit as the executor or the administrator. And if the estate is under a certain amount of dollars, it lifts the lien. If your estate is over a certain amount of dollars, and I think it's $3 million now, if your estate is over a certain amount of dollars, then that lien has to be satisfied before any proceeds from the sale of the house can be distributed. Okay, so this is a relatively short chapter. So liens are types of encumbrances, and liens are always money. So liens are always money. Liens can be voluntary, like your mortgage lien, or involuntary, like a tax lien, a mechanics lien, or a judgment lien. Liens can be specific, like a mortgage lien, and like a mechanics lien, and like a real estate tax lien, or liens can be general, like a judgment lien. Judgment lien is an involuntary general lien against all your property, real and personal. So mortgages, again, are specific. Real estate tax liens are specific. Mechanics liens are specific. Attachments are specific. Liens that are general are unpaid tax liens, IRS liens, unpaid taxes, and estate liens. When you have a lien, the priority of the lien is established by time and date of recording. And sometimes whoever is in second position feels they need to be in first. And if whoever's in first agrees to change position, and that happens from time to time, you can do that with a subordination clause. So a subordination clause, if you've got a first lien, your first lien that was recorded in 2010, and now you've got a second lien that's going to be recorded in 2021, the guy who's in second position can ask the guy who's in first position if they can change position. And that would make him now, instead of the second, the first, and make him, instead of the first, the second. He has to have permission from the first to do it. And you do that with a subordination clause. So somebody's going to subordinate their position. We also talk about senior and junior when we refer to liens. And when we're talking about senior or junior, a senior lien is one that's recorded before a junior lien. A junior lien is in second position or third position. It's recorded at a later date. So a first mortgage is senior to a second mortgage. A second mortgage is junior to a first mortgage. A first mortgage is senior to a second. A first mortgage is senior to a third. But a second mortgage is junior to a first, but senior to the third. Okay, and sometimes they have a weird question like that on the test. I don't know why. Now, mortgages, and we're going to have a chapter on mortgages and financing later on, but we just want to talk about mortgages a little bit now. A mortgage is a hypothecation of a property as a security for a debt. And the person who gives the mortgage is the borrower. That mortgage is just a piece of paper, and the borrower gives that mortgage to the bank. So the bank is the mortgagee. The bank is the mortgagee, and the borrower is the mortgagor. So when you buy a house, you don't get a mortgage. When you're a buyer, you don't get a mortgage. You give a mortgage when you buy a house. You don't get a mortgage, you give a mortgage. The lender gets the mortgage. The lender has the mortgage in their greedy little hands. And at the end of your 30 years, when you've paid it all off, they're going to send you that piece of paper back. They're going to send you that mortgage back, and they're going to stamp that mortgage satisfied. Unpaid municipal taxes automatically jump to first position. So if we have unpaid municipal taxes, we are automatically in first position. Sometimes when you do a search on a house, if you're going to maybe bid on it at the sheriff's sale, and you call up the tax collector and you say to the tax collector, are the taxes all paid up? And the tax collector says, yeah. But what they forget to look is to see if the taxes were paid by an investor at the sale. So the question you should really be asking if you're going to bid at the sheriff's sale on a property is, have the taxes all been paid up to date? And are there any liens from the unpaid municipal taxes from the tax lien sale? So again, that would be part of what you would find if you were doing a title search. You would find those liens recorded that were created from the tax lien sale. But if you just ask the tax collector, are the taxes paid up? They'll say, yeah, because the tax lien certificate investor has paid the taxes. All right, Chapter 16, Federal Laws Affecting Real Estate. And we had a couple questions last night on the test about the Truth in Lending Act. The Truth in Lending Act was part of the Consumer Protection Act. The Regulation Z in the Truth in Lending Act dealt with borrowing, and the purpose of it, Truth in Lending Act of 1968 is a United States federal law designed to promote the informed use of consumer credit by requiring disclosures about the terms and cost, and to standardize the manner in which costs associated with borrowing are calculated and disclosed. So that's the Truth in Lending Act. Again, it protects consumers in their dealings with lenders and creditors. It mandates disclosures of specific pieces of information before extending credit, including in the Regulation Z, including the APR, the annual percentage rate, the term of the loan, how long it's going to be, the total cost to the borrower, any prepayment penalties, and other important information. But these are the main ones that you're going to see in the Truth in Lending Act. Other required disclosures are identity of the creditor, payment schedule, prepayment penalties, insurance charges, late payment charges, description of the collateral, and the collateral is going to be your house, right? A demand feature, and any prepaid finance charges. This law also allows a 3-day cooling off period, and it's 3 business days, including Saturdays. This law applies to credit of up to $25,000, and it also includes money that you borrow to buy a house, which of course would be more than $25,000. However, the 3-day right of rescission does not apply to purchase money mortgages. So if you're getting a purchase money mortgage, you don't have a 3-day right of rescission. If you're refinancing or doing a cash out refinance, there is a 3 business day period for right of rescission. You're buying a car that's under $25,000. There's a 3-day right of rescission on the loan. And that includes Saturdays. Okay, Truth in Lending Act, also known as TILA. It's implemented by Regulation Z. It's enforced by the Federal Reserve Board, transferring to the CFPB. It applies to all residential loans, contains provisions related to proper disclosure of terms in advertising. Terms must be clear and conspicuous. Terms must be actually available. So we had that question on our quiz last night, which terms trigger full disclosure. And this last sentence here that says terms must be actually available, that's the one that makes us, if we don't have a qualifying statement in the offering, if we don't say you might get a 0% down loan to buy a car, you might get it only to our top tier returning customers. If you don't have a qualifying statement, then you have to have real quick talking people or real small print in the ad that gives all the terms and conditions of the ad. So in that test we had last night, we went over last night, one of the questions was what term triggered the full disclosure? And the term that triggered the full disclosure was just a plain old-fashioned statement that says you can buy this house with 10% down, because there's no qualifying thing in there. That would mean to a consumer that anybody could buy that house with 10% down, but that's not the case. So that would trigger all the terms and conditions of the loan. And that's part of the Truth in Lending Act. And this is the kind of ad that they made illegal, because this is an ad that was telling you 0 down, 0, 0, 0, and you'd have payments of $11.98 a month, but nowhere did it say that you had to qualify for the loan or only to people with good credit, etc. So again, the purpose of that Consumer Protection Act Regulation Z is to stop bait and switching. That's one of the things they try to get this not be legal, and to let everybody know the true cost of getting their loan. And when you're getting a mortgage loan and you're reading your disclosures and you read how much you're going to actually end up paying for your house after 30 years with all the mortgage interest included, it's a big number. So, people sometimes are shocked at how much they're going to be paying over 30 years. All right, the next federal law that affects real estate is the Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act. And it covers 1 to 4 family homes and real estate transactions where the property is sold or refinanced with a new first mortgage provided by an institutional lender. It is also required on federally related mortgages. So it's not required on commercial loans. It's not required if you're assuming a loan. It's not required if you're paying cash for a property, because there's no new first mortgage being created. So this is the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. This is to eliminate certain kinds of kickbacks. There's a requirement, there's no tying agreements. A tying agreement is where you're going to get this mortgage or buy this property only if you use a specific title insurance company or a specific provider. You're tying one thing to another. So the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, again, is there to let everybody know the true cost of their borrowing, and they're going to get a closing statement. So it does not cover seller financing, it does not cover an all-cash purchase, and it does not cover a mortgage assumed, which means you don't have to comply with the regulation to provide that closing statement. However, usually you do. Usually there is a closing statement. The next loan is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and it made it illegal for the United States, to discriminate against an applicant and reject them based on certain things that are discriminatory, like their race, like whether they're a man or a woman, or whether they have a phone in their own name. This was the law that actually had a provision before it was passed. Lenders would not lend money to women unless they could prove they were on birth control, because the theory was if they were not on birth control, they'd get pregnant, and then they wouldn't go to their jobs and they wouldn't pay their loans. So this law made that illegal. And it was a big deal. So, you know, they ran the cartoons about it. Next one is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. This act made redlining illegal. And here's a map in Los Angeles of the areas that were redlined. Redlining is when you drew a red line around a certain neighborhood, and that neighborhood, based on its racial makeup, you would not do FHA loans in, which removes the ability for somebody to put a loan down payment on. So it made it much harder for African Americans, and the yellow zones or Asian zones, African Americans or Asians, to buy houses. And this Home Mortgage Disclosure Act overturned that and said redlining is not allowed. Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed in '71. This act requires the 3 credit reporting agencies to give you a free report every year. It allows for you to make a request that they delete information that's not correct, lets you see your files, and limits on who can obtain your credit report from those credit reporting agencies. Good special on 60 Minutes about this if you want to see how weak this law really is, and how the credit reporting agencies and the banks kind of don't really obey the rules or pay attention. And it's very difficult to get something that's bad on your credit removed. The Interstate Sales Full Disclosure Act, there is both a federal law for this, and there is a state law. And this is a act that says if you have a residential development you're building that has 100 or more houses, and you're marketing it in a different state, that you have to comply with some of the rules and regulations. You have to have a formal prospectus. You have to have a registered broker in the state you're trying to market them in. But the most important thing is there has to be a 7-day period of rescission. And it's 7 calendar days, 7 calendar days. That includes Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. So late at night, Eric Estrada, the old TV star from Chips, he's trying to sell little units in Arkansas, and there's more than 100 of them, and he's selling them in Arkansas to people in New Jersey. And so they have to comply with this rule of registering with New Jersey, having a broker of record appointed, paying a fee, and then giving a 7 calendar day period of rescission. So let's talk about days for a minute, because we've got a couple different days. Attorney review, we have 3 business days, not including Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. So attorney review is 3 business days, not including Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. The amount of time we have to present a written offer is 1 business day, and that includes all kinds of days. So the amount of time we have to present a written offer is 1 business day. The amount of time the broker has to deposit a check for a deposit on a property, an escrow deposit, is 5 business days. The amount of days that you have to deposit a check is 5 business days. The amount of time that a broker has to pay you after something closes is 10 business days, The amount of time you have to rescind a loan is 3 business days, including Saturdays. And the amount of time you have to rescind a purchase under the Real Estate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act is 7 calendar days, and that includes Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. So a lot of different time frames that we have to worry about. The next one is the National Flood Insurance Program. This is part of, I think it's FEMA now. I think it was HUD before, and it's FEMA now. Under the National Flood Insurance Program, there's a gigantic pool of money that's maintained by the federal government. And in that pool, people can pay to buy insurance on properties that have a high probability of being damaged by floods. And they have different zones, different risk factors. A 500-year floodplain means once every 500 years your house is going to be flooded. And then they have 100-year floodplains, which means once every 100 years your house is going to be flooded. The guys in the 100-year floodplains, it floods much more often than once every 100 years. but those floodplains and their delineations determine what you're going to pay for insurance. But the big thing is the amount that you do pay for insurance on these flood insurance programs is far below what the true rate should be if there was no government involvement. So this is really an entitlement for people who live along the coast and who live along the Mississippi River, these national flood insurance programs. The next thing is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the Americans with Disabilities Act does not apply to housing. It applies to places of public accommodation, telecommunications for the deaf, and employment, but not to housing. But we still have to be aware of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, easy chapter. Next one is chapter 17, Real Estate Settlement and Procedures under the Real Estate Settlement Procedures or RESPA Act. So the purpose of this act is, again, to let a buyer know or a seller to know the true cost of borrowing. And we're going to create a closing statement that's required for 1 to 4 family homes. It's required for 1 to 4 family homes with a new mortgage, but really we have a closing statement that's made for everything. Every transaction has a closing statement. When we look at that closing statement, it's going to be an accounting summary of what happened in that closing. It's going to be an accounting summary of what happened in that closing. And it's going to be everything within the closing that counts. And the reason I say that is one of the toughest questions on the test is how do you treat the new mortgage that the buyer gets for their home? The new mortgage that the buyer gets for their home is going to be a credit to the buyer. That new mortgage is going to be a credit to the buyer. And that always confuses people because they say, well, how could it be a credit to the buyer if he just created an obligation that he has to pay something? Well, that's why I say the credits and debits in the closing statement only apply to what's in the closing, what's at the closing table. And what that means is if he's going to get a mortgage loan for $400,000, that's $400,000 that he doesn't have to bring to the table because it's coming in from the lender. So we're going to have to kind of make a convention so we can determine what's a debit and what's a credit in our closing statement. And they're not going to make us do a whole closing statement, but they are going to give you some data points, and then they're going to ask you to have those data points, how you rank them on the closing statement. Are they going to be debits? Are they going to be credits? And how much are they going to be for? So in the book, there's a couple of pages of charts where you can memorize what everything is by looking at the chart and memorizing, is it a debit to the seller, a debit to the buyer, a credit to the seller, a credit to the buyer? But that's difficult. So we're going to try to develop a little convention so that we can figure it out. And what I like to do is I like to say, think of the buyer bringing a wheelbarrow full of money to a closing. So I had a closing today and the buyer had to bring in a wheelbarrow full of money. I had to remind her that the closing today, whatever money they told her she had to bring in, had to be in collected funds, not her personal checkbook, but collected funds. And anything that's going to make the wheelbarrow full of money that she had to bring into closing today heavier is going to be a debit to the buyer. Anything that makes that wheelbarrow full of money she had to bring into closing today heavier is a debit to the buyer. Anything that makes that wheelbarrow full of money that the buyer had to bring to closing today, anything that made it lighter is a credit to the buyer. And at the closing today, the seller got a check. Anything that made that seller's check smaller was a debit to the seller. And anything that made that seller's check bigger was a credit to the seller. So if we can kind of remember those things, we'll kind of be able to figure out what everything is. So here is a closing statement. One of the very first things we're going to start with is
Hey,
that,
Bruce,
yes.
sorry, can you repeat slide 2 and the explanation for the seller's part again, please?
So at closing, the seller is going to get a check. Anything that makes his check smaller is a debit to the seller. Anything that reduces the amount of money the seller is going to walk away from closing with is a debit to the seller. Anything that makes his check bigger is a credit to the seller.
Okay, thanks.
Well, we'll see if it works now. Now we get to see if it works. So we're going to start off with our first rule is that the purchase price is automatically a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. So here's the purchase price, and you can see here's the seller. There's the seller's column. And the purchase price, sales price of the property, $293, is a credit to the seller. The purchase price to the borrower, here's the borrower. The purchase price to the borrower, that $293, is a debit to the borrower. We're in the debit column here. It's a debit to the borrower. So now we're going to go through all the different things that are in the closing and see whether they're debits or credits. So let's start with right here with the seller's side. So we have a seller credit for $1,000, and that seller got, we got a seller's debit for $1,000. That means that the seller gave the buyer credit of $1,000 for some repair issue. So that means that the buyer had to bring in $1,000 less money, which made it a credit to him. And it means that the seller's check was smaller by $1,000, so it's a debit to him. And here's one of the ones that quite often gets people confused. This is excess deposit. This is a $7,000 deposit that the real estate agent brought to closing, and that reduces the seller's final check by $7,000. So it's a debit to the seller. Now, the seller is still going to get the whole amount of money, but he's going to get $7,000 in one check from the real estate brokerage, and then he's going to get the rest of the money in a check from whoever was the closing person for the closing. But that excess deposit is a debit to the seller. We also have a credit to the seller for city-town taxes from 5/4 to 6/30. So what this means is that the seller has paid the taxes all the way to 6/30, but they're only going to live in the house. The seller is going to close on 5/4. He's only going to live in the house till 5/4, but he's paid the taxes all the way to 6/30. So he's going to get a credit back of that amount of money that he paid the taxes for, but he didn't live in the house. And we have the opposite adjustment for his HOA. So here's what it shows is he didn't pay his HOA for the month of May. So he's going to get a debit because he lived in the house for the first 4 days of May. He lived there from 5/1 to 5/4 without paying the HOA, but somebody's got to pay that HOA. So the buyer is going to pay it, and it's going to be a debit to the seller because he lived in it for those few days without paying it. All right, and we look over here on the seller's, the buyer side. We're seeing that the buyer is going to get a debit for the taxes because the seller has paid the taxes all the way to June, but the buyer is going to live in the house from 5/4 to 6/30 for free in terms of taxes because the seller has paid him all the way to June. So the seller has got a debit. It's in the debit column of that amount of taxes. And then we also have a homeowner's adjustment of $39.73. So that means that from 5/1 to 5/4, we've got a credit because he's going to pay the homeowners association. So he's going to get a credit of $36.73, which matches this one here. But he's going to get a credit for it because he is going to be the one who end up paying for it at the end of the month, but he didn't live in it for the whole month. So he's going to get a credit for the same amount of money. He's also going to get a debit for his application fee. There's his loan app fee. He's going to get a debit for his commitment fee. He's going to get a debit for his appraisal fee. He's going to get a debit for his credit report. He's going to get a debit for his mortgage insurance. So if we see a mortgage insurance premium here, we know it's an FHA loan. He's going to get a debit for his mortgage insurance, and he's going to get a settlement fee to the title company. That's $525. Those are all debits. Those are all debits to the buyer. They all make the buyer's wheelbarrow heavier because he has to bring that much extra money into closing for each of those items. Okay. Next page. So on this page, we've got a whole bunch of, we'll look at the seller side first. We've got a realty transfer tax. The seller pays the realty transfer tax. So the realty transfer tax is a debit to the seller. It's in the debit column, and it's a debit to the seller. We also have second quarter taxes. So the seller is going to pay for the second quarter taxes. And we have a final water and sewer bill that the seller owes. So that's a debit to the seller. Now we look over here onto the buyer's side. Look at all the debits on the buyer's side. He's got his prepaid interest. He's got his homeowner's insurance premium. He's got his tax escrow. He's got all these little charges that they charge him for things. All nonsense. Here's his title insurance policy. More little nonsense things. Here's his recording fees to record the new mortgage. And here's his homeowner's premium to travelers. So he's getting a homeowner's insurance for 3 months, and then he's getting another year charged for down here. And his power of attorney in order to prepare. So somebody had signed his power of attorney on this, right? And we said that in order to have a power of attorney to sign in real estate related transactions, it has to be a specific power of attorney in writing. And here's where they charged him to prepare that power of attorney. And then this is the fees to FedEx, the paperwork to the other attorney, that was $70. So those are all debits to the borrower, and these are debits to the seller. And now we're going to get to the third page, which is always my favorite page. Third page here, on the seller side, we have debits, and the reason it's my favorite page is there's the commission. We have debits for the commission, and who pays the commission? The seller. So him paying the commission makes his final check that much smaller. Here's what his attorney charged him. Now, we talk about the bulk transfer law, and the bulk transfer law says that you have to, if you're moving out of state, that you're going to have to put a percentage of the sale price into an escrow with the state of New Jersey until you can prove you've paid all your taxes you might owe New Jersey. And look how big his bulk transfer fee was. His bulk transfer fee, again, was $50,000. They put an escrow. There's an outgoing wire fee of $25. Now, I don't know why his bulk transfer fee amount of money was so high, but that's what it was. Then we look over here on the buyer side. He's going to get another acknowledgement of it. He had to pay for his HOA statement, his legal fee to his attorney, his capital contribution to the association, and his prepaid HOA fees. So again, that was all part of his closing costs, and it's a debit to him. So on the test, you're going to have questions about debits and credits. And you're going to have a question. Let's see if I can find a page that's a little bit more easy for us to work with. They're going to give you questions about what is a debit and what is a credit. So let's talk about rents. If we had a property that closed today is April the 7th. If we had a property that closed today and the owner, the seller, had collected the rents. Now, if he's collected the rents for the month of April, he's not due all the money. He's only due the money from April 1st to April 7th. So if he had collected all the rents, there's going to be a debit to the seller from the 8th day to the 30th day, because he's collected the rents for that amount of time he doesn't own the building. And there's going to be a credit to the buyer of the same amount of time, because the buyer is closing today, but he's not getting paid for the rent for the rest of the month because the seller had already collected it. So the buyer is going, unpaid rent is going to be a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. I'm sorry, paid rent is going to be a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Paid rent is a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Let's say we were closing today and they had not collected the rent yet, unpaid rent. that means that the seller is going to own the house for the first 7 days of the month, but he didn't get any rent. So unpaid rent is going to be a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. So now the buyer would collect the rent sometime between now and the end of the month for the whole month of April, but 7 days of that money would be due to the seller because the seller owned the house for the first 7 days. So unpaid rent is going to be a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. And then we talk about taxes. Let's say you were closing today and the taxes had been paid all the way until the end. Let's see, April is the second quarter. So say you had paid your taxes all the way to the end of June. You were the seller and you paid your taxes all the way to the end of June. That means the seller would get a credit back from today until the end of June, the proration of the taxes from today till the end of June. He would get a credit, and the buyer would get a debit because the buyer would be closing today, and if the taxes had not been paid, the buyer would be closing today. If the taxes had been paid, the buyer would be closing today, and he would get a free ride from now until the end of the quarter because the seller had paid the taxes. So prepaid taxes are a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. What if they were unpaid taxes? Today's the 7th of the month and the taxes were unpaid. There would be a debit to the seller for the first 7 days because the taxes were unpaid for the first 7 days when he owned the house, and a credit to the buyer for those same 7 days because the buyer is going to end up having to pay the whole month's worth, the whole quarter's worth of taxes, but he didn't own the house for the first 7 days. Okay, so you're going to have a debit and a credit question. They'll tell you on the test to always use 30-day months. Makes it easier for you to calculate using 30-day months. And they'll tell you on the test also to assume that the day of closing belongs to the seller. And there's no law that says that. It's just by convention that the seller is responsible for the fees that were due today, and the seller is responsible for any rent that was collected for today. Okay, so the day of closing typically belongs to the seller, and they're going to use you when you have to prorate things, when you have to figure out what's 7 days of the taxes, you're going to always use a 30-day month, even if it's a month that has 31 days in it or 28 days in it. And you can see this closing statement is signed by everybody and distributed. The closing statement has to be delivered at closing. And there's some regulations that if you can't attend closing, then it has to be delivered to you in an expeditious fashion. Nowadays, they email this back and forth and everybody approves it before you get to funding the loan. Chapter 20, Anti-Discrimination and Federal Fair Housing. Okay, absolutely positively a hot thing today. This is a YouTube video about the Federal Fair Housing Act. Federal Fair Housing Act was signed in 1968 by President Johnson. There's Walter Mondale over here.
Akara Babu.
Whoopsie daisy. What we got going on here? I don't know what that did, but it didn't work. Federal Fair Housing says, and New Jersey Fair Housing says that we have to have posters in our real estate offices. This is the New Jersey poster against discrimination in housing. And this poster in New Jersey, if you have a real estate office or a rental office in New Jersey, the penalty for not having this poster up is a $100 fine. Later on, we're going to talk about the federal poster. The penalty for not having the federal poster up is a shift in the burden of proof. And that's a big deal because it means that you might have to pay for the other side's attorneys. So when we look at the differences in our fair housing rules between New Jersey and the federal laws, let's look at who's a protected class. So let's start with New Jersey. We have race, creed, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, marital status, civil union status, affectional, yes. Sexual orientation, atypical heredity, genetic information, liability for military service, familial status, ancestry, and source of income. Those are all protections under the federal law. The protections, under the New Jersey law. The protections under the federal law are less. Race, color, sex, religion, national origin, physical or mental handicap, children under 18, or familial status. So there's less protection under federal law. The most important protection is race. There is never a exemption for discrimination on the basis of race. There is exemptions for discrimination on the basis of other protected classes. For example, under the New Jersey law, we call these the Mrs. Murphy's exemption. So except for race, you can discriminate in New Jersey on a 1 or 2 family home for rentals if you live in the other side. So if you live in the other side, you can discriminate, but you can never discriminate on the basis of race. Okay, also you can discriminate on the rental of a unit in a boarding house, but again, never for race. And you could discriminate in a religious organization for people of the same religion, but again, never for race. And you can discriminate against people who are younger than a certain age with the exemption for senior housing. So if you have senior housing, you can discriminate, except you can never discriminate for race under the New Jersey law. These are called the Mrs. Murphy's exemptions because Mrs. Murphy brought a suit because she lived in a house and she was renting out a room, and she said, I ought to be able to pick if I have to rent to a man or not. Under the federal law, the exemptions are a room in the owner's house. So if you're renting a room out into your house, you could discriminate on everything except for race. The sale or rental of religious organizations for its own on everything except for race. A private club for its own members. And you know that means by sex also. That's why you can have fraternities and sororities that say only men or only women, because you can discriminate on the basis of sex under the federal law, but not for race. And then familial status for seniors. So a typical test question is going to ask you, what's the difference between the federal and the New Jersey? Because there's more protected classes in New Jersey. So in the federal, they don't have affectional or sexual orientation. They don't have atypical heredity. They don't have genetic information. They don't have marital status, all things that are in New Jersey's law but aren't in the federal law. In terms of penalties and enforcement, in the New Jersey law, you have 180 days to bring a complaint. If the complaint is found to be true, the penalty can be $10,000 for your first offense, $25,000 for your next offense, and $50,000 for subsequent offenses. Under the federal law, you have 1 year to file a complaint and 2 years to sue for damages. So filing for a complaint typically means that you're going to file for a complaint and they're going to have a reconciliation conference with the defendant. And if the defendant goes ahead and does not discriminate, then they're going to drop the charges. But you have 2 years to sue, which means you're going to sue for damages. You're going to sue for whatever losses you had. And the standing for suing, the standing for your suit has been improved by some subsequent rules. Because now, if somebody discriminates and we lose our commission because they discriminated, we can actually sue and recover a part of our commission. All right, so under the federal, 1 year to file a complaint, 2 years to sue. And these are typical questions on the test. What's the period of time to file a complaint? It's 1 year. What's the typical time to file a lawsuit? It's 2 years. And the penalties are the same: $10,000 first offense, $25,000 subsequent offense, $50,000 for after you've got more than 2 offenses. So again, those are all of the enforcement actions in terms of anti-discrimination rules. This is what they call the equal poster. The equal poster is the federal poster that has to be displayed in real estate offices and rental offices. They call it the equal poster because of the equal sign, and not having this poster in your office shifts the burden of proof. What that means is if somebody comes into your office and says, hey, you discriminated against me, if you've got this poster up, they have to prove that you discriminated. If you don't have this poster up and they come into your office and say, hey, you discriminated against me, then you have to prove you didn't discriminate. And that's really tough because what are you going to do to prove you did not discriminate? So it shifts the burden of proof. So very important to have this up in your office. Okay, Housing and Urban Development has been instructed to be very proactive on enforcing its discrimination laws, its anti-discrimination laws. So they actually send out testers. They'll send out African-American couple and then a white couple, and they'll run them through real estate offices and real estate agents, and they'll see if they have any preferential treatment where the white couple is treated better or than the African-American couple, or they'll send in a straight couple and a gay couple, and they'll see if there's any differentiation in treatment. So they do have testers. There's an interesting television commercial where a gentleman is answering the phone for an apartment rental, and every time the caller comes in, he's got a different accent, and it's just the tester faking the accent to see if the landlords are making the apartment available only to and the last name he uses is Graham Wellington, and he has a real waspy sounding voice when he answers the phone on that one. So that's a commercial that is often played, and I've had testers show up in my office over the 30 years. Very interesting thing when I did some research on this is that there's been many cases of people discriminating, and surprisingly to me, 57%, which is the majority of the cases in 2017, 57% of the cases were for people with disabilities, not on the basis of race or sex, but people with disabilities. That means not renting to people with mental or physical disabilities. It means you have to allow a service animal in if it's really a service animal. If you're renting, you have a no pets policy and they have a service animal, you have to let the service animal in. And again, the law is just over 50 years old because it was signed in 1968. And we got a couple of questions. So number one, all of the following should be considerations selecting a tenant for a property except and we know that that's the ethnic background. The Civil Rights Act of 1866. So the first Civil Rights Act that was passed was right after the Civil War, which ended in 1865. And that gave protection on the basis of color, of race, because it was right after the Civil War. And when we freed slaves, we gave the slaves equal protection for contracts and for housing as whites. So the 1866 law only protected race. The agency responsible for the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act is Housing and Urban Development, is HUD. Housing and Urban Development. That's who's responsible for enforcing the Federal Fair Housing Act. Number 4, it is illegal for a lending institution to refuse to make a residential real estate loan in a particular area only because and it's the physical location of the property. based on being in one of those zones that had been redlined. And I think I told you guys 2 weeks ago that a city in Illinois is going to pay reparations to people who can prove that their families had been the victim of redlining. So that's the first city in America that's going to pay reparations for this. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 is in Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Signed by Lyndon Johnson. The refusal of a lending institution to make residential real estate loans based on racial or ethnic considerations is called redlining. So our answer here is redlining. But let's talk about the other ones. Blockbusting and panic peddling are the same thing. Blockbusting and panic peddling are inducing people to list their house for sale by telling them a protected class is moving into the neighborhood. So after the riots in Newark in 1968, a lot of people went into the Italian neighborhoods and said, you better sell your houses now because African Americans are going to be moving in and the prices are going to drop. That's blockbusting or redlining. I'm sorry, blockbusting or panic peddling. That's blockbusting or panic peddling.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between, I know they are both same, but sometime in a question, they have given both of the choices, so which one to pick? So what is, I know there's a slight difference between panic peddling and blockbusting.
So
Is
there is no difference. They're exactly the same thing.
So you could answer any one of them and
Yeah,
it would be correct?
if they're both in, but you know what? If you see them both in a question, right? That's an indication
Right.
it's the wrong answer. That's an indication that's the wrong answer.
Hmm.
And I have one person who can't see any of these slides, but they're not in the book. They're only on the slide. So there is not a page in the book that we're on. Sorry about that. And I don't know if there's something that I have wrong on the screen here that's not allowing you to see it. I can go back here and see if I can, if that's the case, let's just try that. Okay. I don't know if that helped any. I hope you can see it now. The provision to the Fair Housing Act apply in all states. And let's see if I can make the text a little bigger. Okay. The provisions of fair housing apply in all states. There are exceptions to some of the federal fair housing for all of the following except. So we talked about those Mrs. Murphy's laws that have the exceptions. What's the thing that never has an exception? And that's racial considerations. Okay, steering. And a lot of times the testers will come in and they will see if you're steering. And what steering is leading prospective homeowners to or away from certain neighborhoods. So you're steering them to or away from certain neighborhoods based on their protected class. So steering is A, leading prospective homeowners to or away from certain neighborhoods. Number 10, when a salesperson represents that minorities are moving into the area to get homeowners to sell, that's panic peddling or blockbusting. That's panic peddling or blockbusting. So steering is when you take people to or away from a certain neighborhood based on their protected class. So if you have a person who is African American and you don't show them into any neighborhoods that have very few African Americans in them, that's steering. But on the same On the same side, if you have an African-American buyer and you only take them to African-American neighborhoods, that's steering also. Now, people have a right to choose what they want to go see, but we cannot participate in segmenting those choices by race or by protected class. So somebody can say, I don't want to see any properties in that town, and that's fine. But we can't say, here's a town that doesn't have very many Spanish people in it, because that would be a protected class. There's an Archie Bunker episode, if everybody watches All in the Family, that's called The Blockbuster. And it's a really good representation of exactly how blockbusting works. I think one of the funniest things about it is the Blockbuster offered him for his house on Hauser Street in Queens $48,000. That house would probably be $1 million today. But so if you want to see how blockbusting works, the situation comedy All in the Family, the episode The Blockbuster. I can't get the size exactly the way I want it. Limiting the neighborhood in which a licensee shows homes because of race, that's steering. We're limiting the neighborhood because of race, that's steering. A complaint must be filed with HUD in what time for a fair housing violation? So we have 1 year for a fair housing violation complaint to be filed. We have 2 years to sue, but 1 year for a complaint, 2 years to sue. So the answer here is 1 year. What role may a licensee take in obtaining a seller's disclosure from a seller? So seller's disclosures are not required. What role can we take as a licensee with the seller's disclosure? So the answer is 3. We give the form to the seller and then sign it when they're done. We cannot assist the seller in filling it out. We cannot fill it out for the seller, but we can give them the form. We can give them the form and then pick it up from them when it's done. A licensee must notify the real estate commission if he's charged with a crime, within 30 days. So if you're charged with a crime, you've got to let the real estate commission know within 30 days that you've been charged with the crime. Oops. Who creates zoning rules? So zoning rules are part of the police powers of municipalities. So zoning rules are created by local authorities. And more specifically, they're created by the planning board in local municipalities. And the planning board is made up of 7 or 9 members. And the reason we have to have planning boards is a law that's called the Municipal Land Use Act. Also, the Municipal Land Use Act requires towns to have a master plan, and the master plan has to be amended or readopted every 6 years. A flyer circulates that states Asian buyers are buying all the homes in our town. This is, and it's panic peddling. That's panic peddling. And we do have rules to prove we didn't panic peddle. And the rules are, anytime you mail more than 3 things on one block in 1 week, you have to maintain records of what you mailed for 2 years. Now, last week, I mailed out 40,000 mailings, 40,000. That is certainly more than 3 on one block. So I have to maintain that mailing I sent out, a record of it, a copy of it, for 2 years to prove I wasn't blockbusting. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 makes discrimination illegal on the basis of race. It was the year after the Civil War ended. We were protecting the freed slaves, so discrimination on the basis of race. Fair housing exempts. So what kind of housing is exempt from fair housing regulations? And federal fair housing has an exemption for rental units in an owner-occupied home as long as it's not based on race. That's the Mrs. Murphy's exemption, a rental unit in an owner-occupied home as long as it's not based on race. Now, if you use the Mrs. Murphy's exemption, and you're going to discriminate, but not on the basis of race, because you can never discriminate on the basis of race. But if you're going to use the Mrs. Murphy's exemption, you cannot use a real estate broker, you cannot advertise in a newspaper, and your house is not supposed to have a federally related mortgage. The provisions of the Fair Housing Act apply in all states. So the Fair Housing Act is in all states. New Jersey's law against discrimination is just New Jersey, but the Federal Fair Housing Act is in all states. Federal fair housing does not apply to, and we said that federal fair housing does not apply to marital status. In New Jersey, it does, but federal fair housing does not apply to marital status. What that means is you could refuse to rent to an unmarried couple under the federal law, but not under New Jersey's law. New Jersey allows for no discrimination for marital status. Which of the below is considered?
Bruce, can you repeat that last two sentences for the New Jersey and federal difference between marital status?
So there is a protection under New Jersey's law against discrimination for marital status, which means that you can not refuse to rent to, a man and a woman who are not married. But the federal law doesn't have that protection. The federal law allows you to discriminate and not potentially rent to an unmarried couple. You guys are nowhere near old enough, but back in the 70s, it was illegal to go to a motel or hotel if you were an unmarried couple. You either had to get 2 rooms or you had to lie and say you were married back in the 70s and before that. There's a movie with W.C. Fields, a comedian, from the 1930s, called The Hotel Detective, where his job was to find out in a hotel if the men and women in the rooms were married or whether they were just, not married in the hotel room. So this is all left over from that period of time. When I was in college, it was, you get kicked out of college for having a girl in your room. That was a long time ago. So anyway, the Federal Fair Housing Act does not protect you people based on marital status. The New Jersey law does protect under that, though. Which of the following is considered discriminatory ads under HUD guidelines? And if you read these, all of the above. Man, I think I've hit my last slide. I think that's going to be it for tonight. I got through the slides faster than I thought. All right. So tomorrow night, I'm going to send everybody a test in the morning. And then tomorrow night, we're going to go over that test. I recorded our thing last night. I'll send that out, the link out for that too. I recorded our thing last night reviewing that test. Tomorrow night, we'll review the other tests that I have. And the class will start at 7 tomorrow night. And we're just going to review the questions on the test. And you don't have to come to any class, but by no means is tomorrow night's class mandatory. It's just a bonus class. And then if anybody has any suggestions about what we want to do for next Tuesday and Wednesday's classes, please let me know. I've kind of lost my pace here by taking last week off. So if anybody has any special requests for next week, for next Tuesday and Wednesday, please let me know. And I guess that's going to be it for tonight. Let's see if we got a question tonight. Tomorrow is 7 o'clock is the class. Tomorrow is 7 o'clock is the class. Barbara Cochran, by the way, got on the news tonight, and they announced they're upping the real estate taxes on properties in Manhattan again. And Barbara Cochran was on there, and she was visibly upset, saying that already everybody's leaving Manhattan, and now you're going to see even more people leaving Manhattan. So that was very, very interesting. Ryan's looking for math problems next week. So I'll put that down on the list. We'll do some math next week. And Deborah, can I share tonight's Q&A? Yes. That'll take a day or so because I'm going to share last night's first. And then I'll get to this one second. Let's see, anybody else have anything? Oh, there's another request for math. Good. All right. All right. So then that's about it for tonight, guys. Thank you very much. And we will see you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank
All
you.
right.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a great night. Thanks,
Good night.
Bruce.
Yes.
Good night. Thank you.
You guys are all welcome.
Good night, Bruce. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Bruce, just before you leave, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So I was just wondering what you advise me to do or study during the weeks while we don't have class. So do you advise that I study just vocabulary? How do you, because obviously I want to prepare for the test.
Do the questions at the end of the chapter. And here's how I say you should do them. Don't make the answers in the book. Don't write the answers in the book. Write them on a piece of scrap paper and then go back and grade them. The end of the book is the answers to all the questions. Go back and work on questions because learning how to read questions again is an important skill. Some of the questions on the test, they're almost like the kind of word problems you hated in math class. So you just got to get your skill set back to being able to read and answer questions. There's a whole bunch of test taking techniques because they have a lot of questions that say all of these except, and it's really tricky on your brain. So you've got to get back in the habit of taking tests again. So the best thing I can suggest that you do is take questions at the end of the chapter. Don't write in the book because that allows you to take them a second time or a third time if you want. You could also buy very inexpensive apps for your iPhone to just give you a bunch of questions on your iPhone, so you could sit there while you're driving or something and answer questions. You can also, I'll send you links to some of the classes we did, and you can, go on your iPhone, you can listen to my boring voice as you're driving home from work. So all of that stuff helps.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right. Good. All right.
You have a nice night, all right?
You too. Bye-bye.